Hello and good evening. Welcome to everyone who joined us this evening. My name is Eva Bognar. I am with the Center for Media, Data and Society at the Democracy Institute of Central European University in Budapest. I will be the moderator of today's discussion, which is on the state of journalism in Ukraine. I am very excited to have such distinguished panelists with us. I will introduce them in a second. First of all, I have Olesya Grabova, the author of the Media Influence Matrix Ukraine Funding Journalism Report. Olesya is a CEU political science graduate, and she also has some experience in journalism. Thank you, Olesya, for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
We also have Galyna Petrenko, who is a journalist and media expert with vast experience, and she is the director of Detector Media, an NGO in Ukraine. Thank you, Galyna, for joining us. And we have Marius Dragomir, who is the director of the Center for Media, Data and Society at the Democracy Institute. Marius has been running projects and publishing on media freedom trends, media capture, ownership, and the role of media in post-socialist societies. And this evening, as a starting point, Olesya will present the findings of a report on journalism funding in Ukraine. It's going to take about 10 minutes. Then Galyna and Marius will offer their insights on the situation. I will ask a few questions, and everyone will have a chance to react to one another. And then hopefully we're going to turn to your questions and comments that you may offer on Facebook. We would like to get to them, so it would be great if you could post on Facebook if you have anything to contribute to the discussion. Thank you. Before Olesya starts, just a few sentences about the project, which is called Media Influence Matrix. It is a project that was launched in 2017 by CMDS. The aim of the project is to investigate the changes in power in the field of media. We are looking at three main fields in each country that we investigate. These fields are the field of media governance and media regulation. The second is funding in journalism. And the third is the role technology companies play in journalism and in the public sphere. So far, we have published some 28 reports, and these are available on our website, so you may check them out, from 18 countries, including Pakistan, Spain, Romania, Slovakia, Israel, and so on. And we are always looking for contributors. So in case you are interested and you would like to get involved, then please contact us. So comment, ask questions. And as I said, we're going to start by Olesya presenting the latest of our published reports, which is on funding in journalism in Ukraine. Thank you, Olesya.
Okay, hello everyone. So I would like to start by telling about some main findings of the report and about some troubles I faced while working on it. As you might already know, the Ukrainian media market is dominated by 4 major media holdings that altogether combine 23 national television channels and countless news portals. All these 4 media groups are owned by Ukrainian oligarchs, basically by 4 influential men engaged in different kinds of business, who basically have an unlimited potential to influence public opinion and shape political preferences through their media assets. And now I will share my screen to show you the table, which summarizes the most popular media, their owners, and estimated revenues. In just a moment. So here it is. On the top, you can see here on the left side, these 4 major media holdings, their owners or influencers, the annual income potential, and the most popular news media assets. Can you hear it? Can you see it or no?
Yes.
And in the middle, you can see the information about the public broadcaster. And in the lower part, you can see the other media groups which are less popular and which have less income because they do not have TV assets. So now I stop sharing and continue telling about all this. Okay, you see me, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So for this report, it was essential to find information about the finances of these media companies to get a comparative perspective on their performance on TV, radio, print, and online media segments. But when I started to dig up the data, I realized it's almost impossible to find anything because those media which are owned by oligarchs, they are not accountable and have no financial transparency at all. So since I did not succeed to find it on open sources, I started to send requests for public information to the tax authorities and state statistics services of Ukraine. They refused to provide this information, saying that it might harm the reputation of these companies or the owners. And instead, they suggested that I can send direct requests to these companies asking for public information. So I did so. I sent requests to some 10 TV stations and nobody replied. So after all, I managed to find some data about some companies, and only because of the fact that they are the issuers of securities and they are obliged by law to provide this information publicly. So that's why we have this data, which we can see in the report. And there is a different situation with the independent news outlets which are sponsored from international grants. They mostly provide financial statements on their web pages, so it's very clear how much money they receive, how much they spend, and what are the sources. And at the same time, it's a problem that they are somewhat dependent on this grant money. And if this support stops, they might stop existing too. However, they try to develop some business models, and recently they started to introduce paid subscriptions to their online content. It is still a very uncommon thing for Ukrainians to read the news online for money because they can find news for free. But still, I think maybe like in the next decade, it will be a normal practice. Another finding of this report concerns the public broadcaster. It was launched very recently, only in 2017, and it was established not as a new institution, but it was built instead on the foundation of the former state broadcasters. And because of that, it inherited some huge problems. For example, in 2020, just last year, it had to pay off a 10-year-old state debt, which was almost 10.5 million euro to Euronews. And also with approximately 90% of its budget coming from the state, it is heavily dependent on it. And in the last 3 years, it never received the fully allocated amount of money. It would get only like 50–60% of it. And because of these budget cuts, all debts, and COVID-19 crisis, this broadcaster had to shut down different projects and has a very uncertain future. And it is not as popular as some other commercial companies, but it has some potential to attract more audience if the government funds it properly or if it finds some other sources of financing. So basically, these are these main findings of the report, and I'll let other people speak now.
Thank you, Olesya. Galyna, before I start firing questions, would you comment and give us your take on the situation?
Yes. Hello, everyone. I would like to share my experience because I'm inside this local Ukrainian market for all my life. I would like to stress, to highlight a couple of trends from 2020 in media consumption. The first trend was that first time in our history, social media became second most popular source of information after national TV. The second trend is that also during 2020, such sources of information as national radio stations, local TV channels, local papers, and relatives also grew as a sources of information. What can we say about 2020? Yes, it was a year of COVID-19. It was a year of lockdown. It was a year of rising consumption of content on internet because one of the reasons why the consumption of content on internet was so growing in 2020 was that all cinema theaters were closed or without interesting premieres. So people really consumption shifted not only in news consumption, but also in consumption of entertainment content shifted to streaming platform. The other reason why we saw this situation in 2020 with media consumption was completed reform of decentralization in Ukraine. That's why we faced with this growing consumption of local TV, local papers. And as a result, starting from 2020 and continuing in 2021, we see the trend of appearance networks of local TV channels that are managed from Kyiv. It's like TV holdings with local TV channels, but with very well experienced management teams from Kyiv, who previously worked for the biggest national TV channels. Because people in regions need for local agenda, for local news. As for the uprising move of social networks, I perceive it like a rather negative trend than positive, because this type of media is less regulated by the law, by the national law. And that's the reason why pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin disinformation messages are spread primarily through social media in Ukraine. In turn, Ukrainian authorities want to react somehow to this spread of disinformation. They try in particular to regulate this fear, and I can evaluate this reaction as overreaction, because we have current version of the draft law on media, which is proposed now in the parliament, and it proposes that National Council for Television and Radio Broadcasting will regulate not only all the internet media outlets, but also all the bloggers in Ukraine. A bit stupid and complicated situation how to find a compromise between all the needs inside our society in this sphere. So I have also a couple of forecasts for 2021. The main forecast for 2021 is continuation of growth of popularity of streaming platforms. I mean, not only Netflix. Netflix also is rising in Ukraine, but also local streaming platforms. At the moment, the biggest 4 Ukrainian streaming platforms already have 1 million subscribers together. And their growth is very rapidly starting from autumn of 2020. And only one of these local streaming platforms belongs to a big media holding owned by oligarchs. 3 others are independent. So they are really new new players. And what is interesting, the biggest Ukrainian streaming platform, which is independent from oligarchs, it starts first time in our history producing at least 10 TV series together with the biggest, one of the biggest TV channels, national TV channels in Ukraine. And also this streaming TV platform won a tender for the best European football championships for the next 3 years. Also, in previous years, always the winner of this tender was one of the biggest oligarchic media holding. So it definitely will influence journalism in Ukraine, because traditional mainstream media with newsrooms will lose step-by-step audience and advertising money. So it's a challenge not only for this coming new year, but also for the next years. Thank you.
Thank you, Galyna, for these initial thoughts. Marius, would you take it from here?
Yes, of course. Well, before I start, I just wanted to really congratulate our researcher Olesya for this report. Also, I was thinking that maybe some of the Ukrainian viewers and followers might not join us today, because I guess people in the country all think that they already know the situation. And that being said, I really want to stress that the report is definitely a great lecture and a resource for people who do not live in Ukraine, for people interested in Ukraine who want to learn more. But at the same time, I want to stress that the report is also, I think, an exceptional analysis, and the level of detail that is done is really, I think, a novelty also for the local public. This being said, when we edited the report in-house in the center, we always think comparatively, because we are doing this work in many countries across the world, Central and Eastern Europe, Central Asia. We have reports from Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America. So you always look with that eye, try to compare and see. And I'm sure we'll get this question: where is Ukraine ranking? Who is better than who? But this being said, just a few points about these comparative trends. Well, one of them that was really highlighted here is the power of the oligarchs, which is problematic for the independent journalism and the functioning of the media in Ukraine. But that is not unique for Ukraine. This is something that we have seen in many countries across Eastern Europe and also elsewhere. It's not just the Eastern European phenomenon. It happens in many countries elsewhere. What I really want to stress, so this is the level, the chapter of similarities. I think this is one, the very high level of control of the oligarchs on finances. And yes, Olesya had a lot of difficulties in collecting the data. We try to put together this information, but that really shows how the level and capture, the financial capture of the oligarchs. That happens in many other countries. It happens in Hungary, it happens in Bulgaria, it happens increasingly in countries like the Czech Republic, Poland this year, and so on. The second thing that I wanted to mention in terms of similarities is the link of the media companies with the bigger conglomerates. This is something that happens elsewhere. Media businesses are not run as businesses in Ukraine, but they are part of conglomerates that are invested in many other fields, which at the first sight might not be a problem for some people, but in fact it is. Because media, and this is what scholars call the phenomenon of instrumentalization, which means basically that you do not look at your media as a profitable business. You do not run it for the public interest, but you use it more like a PR or political vehicle to pursue your interests. That's why when you look also in Ukraine, but across Eastern Europe as well, at the level of profitability, there is a problem. Many of these media businesses are not profitable. Now, when it comes to differences, I think comparing again just with the countries from Eastern Europe, the region where we are, I think a difference between Ukraine and other countries is that although the picture is quite grim that we see in the report, Ukraine is not that bad. It's not an extreme case of capture. We speak from Budapest now. Hungary is an extreme case of media capture. Increasingly, Poland is really a really high level of media capture. And one of the many reasons is not only the level of control over the media, but in many of these countries, the government also controls the public media. The public media is turned into a propaganda channel, which is not yet the case in Ukraine because of a different context. The public media in Ukraine was rebuilt only 3 years ago. It's still relatively independent. So this is one point to mention, which was quite, in a way, quite paradoxical. The second point I wanted to make was about the class of oligarchs. Ukraine was a pioneer in oligarchy. You had oligarchs from the 90s, and they have amassed a lot of wealth and money. In Eastern Europe, this has grown more or less in a more recent period, in the past decade or so. It was connected with the economic crisis from 2007, when many foreign media left and the local oligarchs started to buy. So there is a difference there. In Eastern Europe, you see a lot of oligarchs that are like the Prime Minister in Hungary, who created the oligarchy. He created the oligarchs because he needed these people to control the media. In the Czech Republic, the oligarchs entered the government. The Prime Minister in the Czech Republic is an oligarch, so that was the easiest way. Let's just get into the power. While in Ukraine, although the power of the oligarchs is huge, they in fact control the government. So it's traditionally have controlled the government. These are really like when I'm looking at similar things and different things. Now, because this is we promise here a discussion about how to save journalism, or can the journalism be saved in Ukraine? What can be done in the future? Well, there are many things. First of all, as I said, there is a public service media that is still independent. It's not as popular as the other media in Ukraine, but that's really a hope, because there are very good professionals leading the public service broadcaster there. The problem there is with the government in Ukraine that has to honor what the legal the legal provisions say, and they have to pay for that. There are a lot of good news media, and I guess Galyna, you work for Detector Media. It was quoted in our report. So there are hopes there that a lot of these new media will play this role in independent media. The problem is that I think the financial and the market issue will be a real problem for Ukraine, because the market is less developed than in other countries in Eastern Europe. Secondly, the COVID will have I guess is already having a massive impact. So there will be pain there, I suspect. On the good side, there are a lot of philanthropies and donors in Ukraine who are supporting independent media. In fact, I think a lot of the independent media is now supported by donors. So a lot of the hope is put on them to reframe the discussion about media in Ukraine, and to come up with ideas and solutions to really save what is left of independent journalism in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you,
Marius. Would you like to react, Olesya or Galyna? Would you like to react to what Marius said, or what each of you've been saying? No? Okay. Then I think my first question would be about plurality of voices. So Marius sort of started untangling it, that on the one hand, we have somewhat different groups that have a certain level of power, that the government may have been captured to some extent by oligarchs, but on the other hand, the public service media is somewhat independent. I am wondering if these oligarchic groups are different in any ways, if that provides some level of plurality. So if you could comment on that, on whether there's any source where different voices may enter a public sphere.
Well, maybe I can tell something about it. So these media groups are different indeed. For example, Intermedia Group, it is famous for its pro-Russian narratives and sometimes disinformation. So basically, it represents the interest of the opposition party of Ukraine. So basically, all other three groups are not so radical. They support the Ukrainian territorial integrity and national interests. So it's basically this divide between the pro-Russian narratives and pro-Ukrainian narratives. I would say so.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Galyna can tell more about it.
Yes, the pro-Russian and pro-Western division, and also the division by their own business interests in different spheres, in banking sphere, in heavy machinery, in energy sector, and so on. Also, I don't know if you know, but 2 days ago, our government put sanctions against one politician, Taras Kozak, in Ukraine because of terrorist activities with occupied territories in Donbass, and bans his 3 TV channels. Taras Kozak is a proxy of Viktor Medvedchuk, who also can be named as oligarch. Besides, he's outside this group of 4 main oligarchs, as we are discussing in the moment. Kozak / Medvedchuk, they owned 3 news TV channels. In total Ukrainian ranking, they were like starting from 10th or 11th place and further. And they were strictly pro-Russian. They disseminated constantly hybrid war narratives like Ukraine is failed state, Ukraine is ruled by Nazis, Ukraine started the war in Donbass, there is no annexation of Crimea, and so on. What is interesting that already 2 days passed from this ban of these TV channels, and we are looking how their audience went to another media.
So sorry, Galyna, so they were banned. So these TV channels were banned.
Yes, they were banned and they were switched off. So at the moment they broadcast only on satellite and on YouTube. They are absent on the air and they are absent in cable networks, and on OTT platforms as well. They are absent, only satellite and YouTube. At the moment, it is a bit early to say that their audience went somewhere for forever, because it's just the beginning of this process. But what is interesting, the biggest part of their audience at the moment went to another news TV channel, Nash, which is owned by a person, also former MP, also pro-Russian. This TV channel is pro-Russian. But the second interesting part of this observation, that's also significant, smaller but significant part of the audience of these 3 banned TV channels went to news TV channel, which is pro-Western, not pro-Russian, pro-Western. It is very interesting trend, and we suggest that it is because part of their audience watched year by year content like anti-Ukraine, but they were not. They didn't follow on their mind any pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin agenda. They rather watched that content because they wanted to hate the government. So they were, in their minds, they are pro-Western, but they are dissatisfied with some steps of the government, rather in economics or maybe in some points. So yes, pluralism exists, And people, ordinary people, perceive information in very interesting way, sometimes unpredictable.
Anyone else has anything to comment on what Galyna was saying? Yes, Olesya.
Yeah, I can add that currently after this ban, there are huge debates on the internet between people who support this decision and people who are strongly against it. And today I read that even International Federation of Journalists, which are based in Brussels, they expressed their dissatisfaction with this decision, saying that it was a restriction of press and freedom of speech. But in fact, these channels were spreading really disinformation and were really harmful for the national interests of Ukraine. But still, people really have polar opinions now on the internet. So maybe it's interesting to discuss it, if it was really a restriction or it was supposed to be done.
So that's very interesting what you all are saying, because it's basically that plurality may come from unexpected sources and ways in such an environment. Audience related to that, actually, may contribute to saving journalism or plurality of voices in Ukraine. And the question from the audience, and thank you for the question, is the following. What international media development interventions could do to strengthen independent media in Ukraine? That's one. And the second that we will pick up on for sure is whether you see emerging funding models that could lead to sustainability. So let's put this apart, and at first let's see what you have to say about the role of international media organizations or media development organizations interventions. How would you say, what is their impact, if they have any, on the situation?
I can intervene if I may. Well, I think it's as I said, if you look at the funding models, and Olesya covered that in the report, there is a problem with the fact that the Ukrainian market is still not able to support independent journalism. Maybe a little, but there are major differences between the Ukrainian market and other markets, and that is an issue, for example, even for the public broadcaster, because many really independent public broadcasters across Europe, to be independent, they are usually funded through a form of license fee that insulates them from government pressure. That is not possible in Ukraine, unfortunately, because another tax introduced on people, however small that is, would not be acceptable. So there are no sources, and that's why the government has to actually fund the public broadcaster. On the other hand, yes, the report mentions some attempts to try paid models, and hopefully that will happen. But again, that will be, I suspect, and I expect that will be just a small population that is used to paying for news, and that is also more affluent. In other words, people who actually have money to pay for that. So definitely that would be something that should be developed. But when it comes to the current moment, when you have a structure so dominated by oligarchic power, which is immense, and then you have independent journalism really small, trying to survive. Really, what we look at is international media development supporting a lot of initiatives. They are actually taking they are responsible for that, and they do a good job because they support these media outlets. But I think more has to be done, because one thing is to really look at the market as a whole, to really understand to really find new and innovative ways to support independent journalism. It's not possible to fight with these huge market powers and to really believe that in a few years you will be able to develop independent journalism.
Thank you. Olesya, Galyna, would you like to comment on the role international organizations are playing in supporting independent journalism or otherwise?
Yes, international organizations do support independent journalism in Ukraine, but their contribution is rather like a drop in an ocean. And what is also interesting, a very tiny part of this drop goes to oligarchic media. Maybe you will be surprised. Yes, some donors fund production of TV series and TV shows, and with narratives of uniting the countries, West and East, this deoccupation narrative. So they want to achieve the biggest audience as they can. That's why they sometimes fund some TV production for this oligarchic media, because they are the most popular.
Uh-huh.
And they are aware that they are owned by oligarchs, correct?
Sure. Yes.
Yeah, but how can you reach the audience that you want to reach with your message if these are the channels that are reaching the audience, right? That's the dilemma I'm sure they're facing. Yeah. Anything else on this on funding models? Olesya, you mentioned that some organizations have introduced paywalls. Are there any other ways that that are emerging as funding models, sustainable funding models?
Yes, some online news portals introduced paywall, and basically people have to pay only for the part of the content. So part of the content is for free, and if you want to go deeper into news, you have to pay for it. But it's a trend which is common only for several news media, such as Novoye Vremya and maybe Kyiv Post. So it's not really a common practice. Some other introduced paid subscriptions for the TV content. It is about these big four media groups. It concerns 1+1 Media. They introduced paid TV, and some other media groups too. But still, people try to find this free content on the spaces of internet because it's more convenient. And so basically, there is no new financing models, and these independent organizations much depend on grants. And some of the biggest donors in Ukraine are National Endowment for Democracy. Also, it is the Foundation to Promote Open Society, Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, and of course, United States Agency for International Development, which heavily invests into different media projects in Ukraine. And I can give some figures about it, that around $9 million have been distributed to various organizations since 2009, which work in the areas of media access and policy issues, which is basically not journalism, but various projects which examine the work of journalists and various policy innovations. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's not a lot considering how big this market is and the power of the other players. Yes. We have more questions on this international aspect, which I think is interesting, and we may wrap this into the social media questions. So, so the first part is how are international journalists and international platforms treated in Ukraine? That's one side of the coin, and the other is if Ukrainians consume international media to get alternative news. And I guess social media is at is one potential core of this question. So if that provides some plurality again of information.
Well, I can tell about it a bit, about the part where the Ukrainians consume international media. So I know that Ukrainians like to consume news which are in Russian language because it's more easier than in English. And of course, it would be Russian news. And in 2019, I had data that about 7% of Ukrainians regularly read Russian news to get the information about different social political events. And I believe that this trend is still at the same level. Also, before 2017, many people used Russian social network Vkontakte to exchange emails and read news, but then it was banned. And now it is not as popular as it used to be, but some people still find ways to reach it by using VPN and so on. I cannot answer the question how international journalists are treated in Ukraine because I'm not really familiar with this thing. So maybe Galyna or Marius can tell more about it.
Galyna, Marius?
Well, I'm not really sure about the local situation in Ukraine of international journalists. I guess I see reporting in international media. The question here, I would say, is more whether Ukrainians, there are more or fewer Ukrainians looking at news from, I don't know, Western media or not, because that will tell you more about the diversity of news they consume. We understand definitely that there is an appetite for Russian language news coming from various outlets, and that's correct. But it would be interesting to look into how much of the Western news diet is consumed. I'm not sure what is the situation now.
Galyna, do you have a sense?
Yes, I confirmed the information about the consumption of Russian news and in particular Russian TV channels. Still, so regarding international media as broader aspect, not Russian, I would like to divide it into two parts. The first one is about international journalists, and the second one is about international platforms, social media platforms. When our new government came into 2019, they were very brave, and they wrote a draft law on regulation of international social media and video streaming platforms. They wanted to introduce 20% VAT tax for them, for their operations in Ukraine, and also they wanted to introduce for them Ukrainian regulation for content in terms of language of the content, percentage of content produced in Ukraine, and so on. They failed with this draft law. We had no trade wars like France had with the US. We didn't come to the trade war. I think that just some negotiations was between politicians, or maybe like Chamber of Commerce of the US in particular and our government. So our government said that, okay, we will not provide these regulations, but in terms of countering disinformation, from time to time, this idea to put some regulation on international platforms appears. Now our authorities are very accurate with these messages. Because they are already well-experienced politicians, not as it was before in their careers, because they were mostly not from mainstream political life. But because of each and every step in the US or in the EU, in terms of some new regulations towards social media platforms, starting from this ban of Donald Trump accounts and coming to President Macron initiatives. So each and every this initiative finds some reflection in minds of Ukrainian politicians, Ukrainian authorities. They always say, you see, we told you, and we will come in the end to some regulation. If you're talking about international journalists, for example, our president, Volodymyr Zelensky, from time to time gives interviews to international media. He he does not give an interview to Ukrainian media almost, but international media are important for him. At the same time, we have a plan for this year, for 2021, to invite into Ukraine Euronews TV channel. Again, he was here in the market some years ago. Again, invite this TV channel and provide finance for him from public budget. So we are looking at this situation. We are not very big fans of this situation because we do not understand why do we need to spend money of taxpayers for this actually private international TV channel. So this is the situation how it is.
Thank you, Galyna. We have picking up on this information. One of our members of the audience been asking about disinformation, and in particular about the disinformation you mentioned that was spread by the banned channels that were broadcasted. If you could, I understand they were pro-Russian, but if you could give a few examples, or if you could elaborate on what kind of disinformation was going on.
Yes, I know that it's hardly to believe that they broadcast such disinformation on the air, but they said not once, not twice, but constantly during the years that there was no annexation of Crimea, like it was just a free vote of people of inhabitants of Crimea. Also, they stated that Ukraine started the war in Donbass. That's Ukraine. The only who can end the war in Donbass is Ukraine. Like Putin doesn't exist at all. Also, they invited, for example, far right speakers to their air. I think that they did it in order to support the message that Ukraine is under Nazi control. Also, they broadcast, for example, multiple press conferences of Andriy Derkach. I don't know if you know who is this person. And this person at the moment is under sanctions of the US because of interfere into the US elections. So our organization conducts constantly monitorings of content of TV channels, and we during recent 5 years put an eye constantly on content of these 3 TV channels, and we can prove that they did it and broadcast these messages intentionally, not just accidentally. We all understand what is free air when you invite some speaker and guest of the studio starts saying something, so host can react, and the conversation, and then do not invite again this guest. But it's not a situation with these 3 TV channels. They broadcast these messages constantly, day after day, in all their content.
Well, actually, being a Hungarian, I am not surprised at all that that TV channels are blatantly spreading disinformation or pro-Russian propaganda at times. This is happening in Hungary as well, and in Poland and elsewhere as well. So, I would like to be surprised. I wish I was, but I'm not, unfortunately. Olesya or Galyna or Marius, what would you say about the occupied territories? Are they a world of their own? Is it a completely different story altogether, or do they kind of melt into the general market trends that you've been talking about?
Yes, I can tell about it. So basically, since the occupation, all or most of all the Ukrainian media were banned, and instead of Ukrainian media, Russian media came. So basically, people can hear only Russian narratives on the news, from TV, from radio, in the newspapers. But recently, Ukraine started to try to reintegrate its citizens politically and culturally, and launched a television channel which is called Dom. It can be translated as house or home. It is broadcasted on the east of Ukraine, in the occupied territories of Donbass. And it is mostly in Russian language, because that population in that area speaks mostly Russian. So Ukraine really tries to fill this information space by some Ukrainian news. However, currently, as I saw, it's mostly the entertaining content and not much about news. But maybe in the next 5 years or 10, it will develop more and will perform its function. Meanwhile, in Crimea, I think it is the same situation. But the thing is that there used to be many various media which were oriented at Crimean Tatars, and now they mostly also stopped to perform, and some of them moved to Kyiv, and one of them is called ATR. It is supported by government. It is sponsored from the state, and now it is also experiencing huge troubles because it does not receive the allocated amount of money from the state, and it is also on the brink of collapse. And basically, it is the only one television channel which broadcasts in Crimean Tatar language, which is very important for Crimea. So things are not very nice, and things are getting worse, as it seems like, because the state does not really want to invest money into this media for these territories. Yeah.
Thank you. Galyna, is there anything you would like to add?
I may add a bit about this Dom TV channel. Everything is correct that Olesya said. The strategy of this TV channel is to broadcast mostly entertainment content and put pieces of news in between in order to not in order to engage people, the audience. At the moment, the majority of their entertainment content was donated to this TV channel by oligarchic media holdings, free of charge, and it's a bit it creates some limitation for these TV channels in terms of broadcasting, because of course private owners of this content, they are strongly against broadcasting on satellite, for example, this content. That's why starting from 2021, this year, this state TV channel Dom has enough public money to produce their own entertainment content. They are going to produce, to be ready to broadcast the first TV series in September. So this is the strategy. They believe in this strategy. They should try. It will be successful or not. In case if not, they will change it somehow.
Thank you. I have one last topic. I don't know if we'll have time to properly address it, but I'm really curious to hear about trust, trust in the news by the audience, because in polarized societies, that it seems to be the Ukrainian case is quite a polarized environment in which, if I understand correctly, the two competing narratives, the two competing worlds are the pro-Russian or the pro-Western narratives put forward by different media outlets. And the case in some cases, it really means that that people start mistrusting the media altogether. Sometimes there are different trends where they trust the media that they consume, but they don't trust the alternatives. And I'm wondering which one it is, because in this region, there's a big tradition of reading between the lines, so not taking anything that comes from above without a grain of salt. So I'm wondering if that tradition lives on, which means even if the narrative fits within my worldview, I am highly critical and take everything with some level of mistrust. Or if the division between these worlds is such that that they are happy to be uncritical as long as it falls within their existing worldview. Galyna, Olesya, would you like to, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can tell that the level of trust has been dropping since 2015. For example, for television, it dropped from 61% to 48%. And all this trend is common for internet, radio, and print. So people lose trust in media. However, at the same time, they say, according to some surveys, that they can differentiate disinformation from real news. They are really confident in that, but when they are asked to differentiate it, they actually cannot do it. So people are not trustworthy, but they think they're smart, but at the same time, everything is hopeless. So yeah, that's how I see it, because the numbers are really negative. And for print, it is especially very vivid because the level of trust dropped twice since 2015. So this situation we have.
Galyna, would you like to comment on trust?
Yes, I agree. The level of trust to media is really sad. And we always see the picture that the level of trust is about twice less than the level of consumption of this media. So yes, people I don't know, want to struggle. They do not trust, but still consume this media. Also, I may add just a short addition to our discussion, maybe a bit outside even of the topic, about entertainment content. We just today have a very fresh, we published today our research on how Ukrainian TV series and TV shows provide some values and models of behavior to people. And what is the fresh finding? That TV producers say that they do not put any messages of this kind, like values, any patterns of behavior. Their entertainment content is free of this intentional intentional messages, but the audience of their TV channels perceive all these popular products as they provide some values and models of behavior. And also continue to watch. Sometimes disagree with this and continue to watch.
Thank you, Galyna. Our time is up. If there are any last questions from the audience, then we can still take them. But otherwise, I will ask you if you have anything else to add. If there's anything you would like to say, either on the topics that we've touched upon or topics that we haven't. Otherwise, yes, Marius.
Yeah, I can very quickly say that it's a very difficult environment for the media. We spoke about that. We have a very strong stranglehold of oligarchs on the media. We have a very strong narrative. which is not always true. It's based on disinformation. We have a government that unfortunately doesn't really understand or doesn't want to understand, or it is controlled by oligarchs. So it is quite a desperate situation if you look at that, and it really rests with donors, international development groups to really think seriously about that, because we are losing really Ukrainian journalism there. The two key areas that I see really important, I think one is who has the interest and the funding to really focus on helping the local community of journalists to learn how to design business models and the business model for journalism. And the second, to really help the community to build, to become more powerful in terms of access and engagement with audiences. Is the only way to really counter this immense power and powerful narratives that we are talking about. I hope they will do it.
Thank you, Marius. This would have been my last question. If journalism can be saved, and if so, then where this would come from? Who's the savior? I don't know if Olesya or Galyna has anything to offer, to add to what Marius has already said. Olesya doesn't know if journalism can be saved.
Well, I'm very pessimistic about this topic. I think it is hopeless. Only international organizations can help by financing some independent journalistic projects. Otherwise, it will be all dominated by oligarchic structures, which is not so good for journalism at all.
Thank you, Olesya. Galyna, please offer some hope.
I believe that it is necessary to follow the reform of public broadcaster. It is weak in television part, but it is strong in radio part. And we already start in January, we strengthen this radio broadcasting in technological terms. It starts even to broadcast to occupied territories. This year will be a bit crucial for public broadcaster because we will have the first re-election of the head of the board. Already we had new appointments and elections of members of supervisory board, and now this refreshed supervisory board will elect a new head of board, and it's really crucial to keep the independence of this person. I don't know even who are the candidates at the moment, and the election will be in May. So it is really important to maintain this independence of news of public broadcaster, and to help this media entity to develop its production and to develop finally interesting video content.
Thank you, Galyna. So we should watch how these things unfold regarding public service media, and please watch our channels, our social media, the Center for Media Data and Society, and the Democracy Institute. Both organizations are on social media, and we have similar events on the rule of law or on current issues related to media. And Olesya's report will be coming up on the next chapter on Ukrainian media and related to governance and regulation. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for watching, and we hope that we'll see you next time.